complex, much too complex, too complex, much too complex, too complex, too complex, too complex.
Good afternoon. My name is James K. Holder II. Some of you may know me as Sir James II, and I'd like to welcome you back to Not On My Watch. As always, I'd like to ask you to like, share, comment, and subscribe. I want you to retweet this and repeat this. If you're watching, today is Friday, February 16th, and the world is taken aback and enamored with all of the splendor and glory that is Black Panther. So today I just want to talk about that particular project, that movement, that movie, and everything about it without giving away any spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, don't worry, I'm not going to ruin it for you, but I do want to talk briefly about what that movie means for the culture and what lessons maybe we can take from it in this Black History Month. As I mentioned, it is Black History Month, so of course there's going to be a bit of a focus on that in this episode. Now, I just want to kind of briefly talk about the movie. I will be perfectly honest. I was not very excited about going to see this movie. I can't really explain to you why, but there are a lot of moving parts around it. One, we're in a particular space in United States history where there's a particular aversion to people of color. There's a motivation to kind of squash excitement around Black film, Black cinema, enterprise, anything that sort of celebrates what we focus on as a community. And so I'm not wishing anything bad, obviously, or trying not to speak anything into existence, but movie theaters are not the safe havens for entertainment that they used to be for family fun. We are a country riddled by gun violence, and it is a dangerous proposition. I'm not going to say I was afraid to go see the movie, but I did fear that something would happen, potentially. And I still also fear that something might happen this weekend because it's the biggest opening weekend probably in American history, especially for a Black movie. So we really need to be careful about that. There's really nothing you can do to prepare for a situation like that other than just be alert, be present, and be careful. Now, moving along into the actual film. I thought the project was splendid. It was really a treat. It was really captivating. I'm always nervous about projects like that as to whether they can really tell a good story beyond just the action of it. And this movie absolutely did that. There were a lot of really good messages embedded in it. I think some might go over certain viewers' heads. I think this is one of those movies where people are going to take from it what they want, really. And that's kind of maybe somewhere where I aim to kind of facilitate a better dialogue or a preparation for that here. Speaking just of the cast and crew, Letitia Wright, for me, made this movie. She seems brand new. I haven't seen her act in anything else. But she was just a sparkling gem on the screen. She was fantastic. She probably had the most lines of anybody in this movie, it seemed like. She had the best lines, certainly the best one-liners, the best takes. She threw the most shade. She really was a fantastic actress, and she really just drew you in and really gave you something to enjoy about the movie. I loved her character in the movie. There was one person who, when the screen showed them in the theater, that everyone gave a round of applause, and that was Miss Angela Bassett, the incomparable, multi-talented Angela Bassett. She's in everything, right? She acts on television, she acts in movies, she is in many of the better television franchises that exist right now in American television. So it's hard to kind of gauge on a scale where this performance is for her, but she was phenomenal. And it really was amazing to see her on screen because it seems like every time they showed her, it was another like gasp-worthy moment. Like really, she actually took the audience's breath away. So I'm not going to give much away, but she really just brought so much conviction, so much presence and wisdom and regality to what this film is. This film is about an empire and royalty, and she really, if no other character brought that element, she did that to make that really, really hit home. Lupita Nyong'o, of course, stunning. You would expect nothing less. The fashion was stunning. You would expect nothing less. She really just has a screen presence that is sort of it's kind of unmatched. And I will be perfectly honest. You can revoke my black card for the remainder of this episode if you wish. I had never seen Lupita Nyong'o act in anything else. I have not seen 12 Years a Slave. Don't judge me. I'm really not a big movie person, and that's probably why I was not so excited to go see this movie, even though I took my ass to the theater at 11:20 last night in Atlanta and went to go see this movie. Lupita Nyong'o is fantastic. And I will say, of everyone on the cast, she's probably the one person who, if anybody made me like get up to go see the movie, it was probably her. Chadwick Boseman, of course, was phenomenal. I mean, I keep using these really blanket terms because I really don't want to give much away. Chadwick Boseman, his role carried so much weight of the film, and in terms of just the authenticity of like the accent and being drawn into the character and the feel that you were really somewhere else, I think he did a really, really good job of commanding that presence of African royalty. It really seemed familiar. It really was believable. And of course the action and just his presence and the fashion and everything was also quite spectacular. Michael B. Jordan is, Michael B. Jordan is Michael B. Jordan. Anything he does is going to be great. And he certainly has a very specific chemistry with this particular director. So that's something that I was excited to witness. Michael B. Jordan's character played a very, very important role in this. And I wish, what I will say is that if there's any character that you have to pay particularly close attention to what they're saying, especially if you're white, that's the character you need to listen to. Because there's actually, I would say Letitia and Michael B. Jordan are sort of two sides of the same coin in a very different way. They tell one sub line of text that is really, really critically important to the story. And I think if you don't take anything away from the movie, take what Letitia says and take what Michael B. Jordan's character say and really focus on those in terms of just lines. Focus on those two characters and you'll walk away with something impactful. Forrest Whitaker, obviously, Forrest Whitaker to me, again, he's kind of playing that elder role. And so, but that's important. So he plays a very, very important role. And his character ties in really the overall story. So again, you have to just kind of pay attention and just really marvel. But he really draws you in. He's so believable. It's really, really great. Denai Guerrera, aka Michonne from The Walking Dead, gives you nothing less than what you would expect. It's kind of like watching. No, I can't even say anything about it. She is the most exciting person on camera. Like every time she's on camera, she's acting in every scene, even if she don't have a line. Like everything she does was fantastic. There was a lot of action in this movie. There was a lot of technology action. There was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of, a lot. It was really, there were so many complex scenes. It really, not to use the word Trump, but it trumped really for me any Mission Impossible I've ever seen. It really trumped the action in any James Bond film I've ever seen. It was a really amazing film to watch. And just on a side note, there was so many nods to the actual culture. There was so much authenticity in the wardrobe. You know, one thing I was afraid of is that the wardrobe was going to seem costumey, and it really didn't. They really did a good job of really showcasing a lot of the different cultures, tribal cultures in Africa that have been documented, that we know, that we have visuals from. So you can see a lot of different representation in the hairstyles, in the jewelry, in the clothing, in the prints themselves, and then also in a modern interpretation of what those prints would look like in a different context. And so that was really beautiful to watch. The stage design, actually I have a close friend who worked on the film in that department, and I was really taken away by all of that as well. I mean, and it's funny because a lot of there is a high level of like CGI in it, in terms of not so much in the film itself, but like in the scenes, a lot of it. So even though it's filmed in Atlanta, there isn't much like physical representation of Atlanta in it. But it really was something to watch. And if you pay close attention, look at some of the design and the decoration and the details that went into the spaces on the sets, because those really give a lot more insight into the story and the sort of underlying story. One place I will say that this movie, I don't want to say disappointed me, but like, I was hoping that there would be more direct correlation to the Black Panther story, the story of the Black Panther movement. I didn't really get that from this movie. It's there in a subtext, but you really, if you didn't have any like knowledge of it before, it would kind of just disappear. And so one thing I want to do here is kind of, again, we discussed like all the previous framework of this month's episodes, it being Black History Month. And I kind of wanted to just kind of frame today's problems in the United States with the context of other black movements, whether successful or not. So let's talk about the Black Panther movement. I will say I'm not an expert on this topic, but I think there are a few critical takeaways that we can look at things that are going on in America now and maybe apply lessons and figure out ways that we can move forward. This week, we learned that Trump's administration, in an effort to slash expenses from the budget, now they wouldn't need to do this if they didn't give away this huge tax scam at the end of last year, but that's neither here nor there. So now they're trying to cut all this money from the budget, and they are targeting SNAP benefits. Now, SNAP benefits, aka most people know them as food stamps. It's not a stamp anymore, it's like a card. Typically the form of like a debit card, but again, semantics. And the program is aimed at being called this harvest box. So it's this idea that they're gonna take half the money that they would have given to you on a debit card, and then replace it with sort of pantry staple items. And I really think, outside of it just being seeming like another attack on the poor, which I think that's all this administration is really about, it really is sad because they're calling it a harvest box, but there's no fresh ingredients in this box. Even to the point where now they're replacing, powdered milk with actual fresh dairy. And it's sad in many parts because we talk about this a lot on the other show, The Counter. If you haven't watched The Counter, it's a really good show to watch. It's on the same YouTube channel as this, so please check out an episode. We talk about food scarcity, specifically within the context of like home economics and also race. What does it mean when you live in a community that is cut off from access to fresh food, and how does that impact your health? So this is a topic we are very familiar with within this dialogue. But one thing that is sort of ignored in this is that many different families have different dietary restrictions. Different individuals within a family might have different health issues that limit what they're able to eat, or they might have food-specific allergies that limit what they're able to eat. And so I think this idea of having this prepared, predetermined set of things that someone's going to have to cut half of what they would be used to making their food budget stretch to have it be predetermined for them. I think that's something that most people are skeptical of. I think it's dangerous because now, if you're trying to feed children who are very, persnickety eaters, out of this box of not particularly tasty or flavorful items, and then adding the layer of, okay, you might not even be able to process the items within your body because you might have other dietary issues. I think it's just one more level of overreach. I think it's ironic that you have a government or an administration that's supposed to be about removing red tape and removing restrictions, but it's applying more to this particular segment of the population. And it's because it's targeting Black people or people of color, but really we know that most recipients of SNAP benefits are white people, so and people in rural white communities. And so it does beg the question, where is that going to leave all of us? And I think it's going to be something that's obviously selectively enforced because they're going to find ways to implement the more, negative aspects of this on people of color in urban communities, and then ignore that, rural communities really should be getting the same treatment. That I don't believe that's going to happen. Most things in this country tend to be enforced in a really lopsided way, and by lopsided I mean racist. So let's talk about an alternative that we can take from the Black Panther movement. Now, starting just based on the concept of food for students, the Black Panthers ran a very successful program called the Free Breakfast for School Children program. And this is where in Oakland, California, starting in just that local community, in conjunction with their school, where they taught 150 students in the community. This started in, please don't quote me on this, I believe 1969. I didn't write that date down. But you had the Black Panthers cooked and served hot meals for students attending school in the area. And this program was so successful in that year that by the end of the year, I believe it was 1969, this program started in January of that year. By the end of the year, they had programs and satellites set up all over the country, and they were serving hot breakfast to 10,000 students daily to attend school. And that's a very important lesson to take from not only this movement that was the Black Panthers, but also, the movie kind of touched on that that community reliance, that interdependence. And I think if we're looking at where we're going as a society, what we can expect to go away, how do we begin as smaller, like in the local community? How do we begin to solve some of these problems? How can we be proactive? Because we can do everything we can do at the ballot box, but at the end of the day, there's only so much that the voting is going to contribute to. And so then you have to figure out, okay, well, in what ways can we really contribute in terms of charity, in terms of service, and really using service as a form of our activism and resistance. So that would be one thing that I would like people to kind of go back, do more research on, because I think most people don't see, the Black Panthers were labeled as a terrorist organization effectively. Like many of the original founders of the Black Panthers were either assassinated or targeted in many really specific ways. And so it is sad that was the takeaway when so much good was being done. But again, look up that program, Free Breakfast for School Children program. And that even, that program evolved in a lot of different ways that we can continue to talk about in other forms. But, they had clinics, they had a program called, overall it was a branch of programs called the survival programs. And one of the programs was called Medical Self-Defense, which had screenings for things like sickle cell anemia. They did different things in the community in Chicago, Oakland, all over the country. They had their own ambulance service. They had a door-to-door clinic. They had a lot of different things that were going on that offered services to the community. So if we're talking about healthcare in this country and how it does or doesn't work for certain segments of the population, food and sustenance programs from the government, if they're not going to work for us, how do we interject? How do we step in and really provide some alternative to make sure that those those people aren't falling through the gaps. I want to talk about one of the next tragic things that happened this week in America. Now, this week, there was a shooting, another mass shooting in Florida. And this is so commonplace in this country that I'm not even going to spend time focusing on the incident, because really, it is numbing and it's sad and it's tragic, but all of the takeaways are the same. And so my question is, how is this conversation going to evolve? Where are we going to take the lessons from anything? Are there any lessons from this series of tragedies that we're going to apply as we move forward? And so far, the answer has been a resounding no. I've been particularly unnerved about this particular occurrence. I've not been interested in really engaging anyone about it because I really, and this is where some of you might change the channel, and that's fine, because this is I'm just kind of stepping outside of a discussing the news, and now I'm giving my point of view where you probably won't get it anywhere else. I don't think white America is prepared to have a conversation about guns. And I'm not ready to have a conversation with white America about guns either. And the reason I say it that plainly is because the progressives are really not very good at listening. We try to form alliances, and we try to have an understanding and a collective around a core set of values. Among those are sensible gun legislation. Now, I will say that I, of course, voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. I was all on board anything this woman proposed in terms of gun legislation because something needed to change. I think that many of the proposals that were in place there were really would have been a step in the right direction. And I do want to say that I have not been encouraged by much of the dialogue on either side that I've seen in social media, and I haven't really watched much on television, but what I've seen on television has not really left me encouraged about where we're moving forward. And the main reason why is because I'm going to start using this term, blind spot progressives. One of the reasons I was really afraid to go to this movie is because I live downtown in Atlanta. I don't travel outside of a certain perimeter. Not the perimeter. My perimeter within Atlanta is much, 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 much narrower than 285. And so it's much narrower than the belt. What is that called? The belt line. I really don't travel above 17th Street. I don't travel west of Moreland ever. East of Moreland ever. I don't really travel west of Howell Mill / North Side, and I don't really travel south of 20. So that's just for my own protection. I think that's my locus. That's where I spend most of my time. So there's only really 2 movie theaters in that zone. I would not be comfortable going to a movie theater anywhere outside of that. I'm not saying Midtown Arts Cinema or the Atlantic Station Theater are much safer than any other theater in Atlanta, but just for my own personal purposes, I wouldn't do that. Last weekend, there was a shooting about an hour, not even an hour, like 50 minutes south of Atlanta in Locust Grove. I believe 3 police officers were shot. Again, this is not a story I investigated much because it wasn't covered much on television. And what I saw online immediately went to this really forceful, Blue Lives Matter, rah, 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 we're going to take up our guns and revolt situation. I don't know the ethnicity of the shooter, and I don't know that the ethnicity of the shooter actually matters anymore. What we're experiencing in this country is a situation that is the recurring threat that's been existent in this country that is the fiber of our society. People want to talk about the need for the Second Amendment, which is to keep the King of England out of your face. I really feel like we've moved out of that space. We've been out of that space for a very long time. And I really sincerely believe that the underlying purpose of having guns in America has been to have a method of control in place to preserve white male dominance and white privilege. That's just the reality of it. You don't have to agree to that, but that has been the documented thesis throughout. It's been the control. It's been the result. It's been the conclusion. Every single time we see that guns are used by white people to control other people of color. We saw it in the Ammon Bundy thing. We see it in all of these mass shootings, whether it is a mass shooting at an abortion clinic. We see it over and over and over again. And we have to be mindful of the narratives that contribute to these occurrences. Everybody wants to talk about, everybody has their own reason why this is happening over and over again. But I think there's only a few recurring themes, and that is this white male dominance narrative. Again, you can be an agent of white male dominance or white supremacy and not be white, right? Because if you're following along a set of narratives and dialogue from this particular segment, this NRA-funded segment of the population or of the political dialogue or your echo chamber, you're going to behave in accordance with those actions. So I don't want anyone to be misguided and confused when I talk about the need to preserve 2A or certain rights as I'm influenced by gun nuts. I'm really not. I am a licensed firearms carrier in the state of Georgia. I own weapons. I own ammunition. That is something I admit freely. Most people probably won't admit that to you, but in Georgia, that is the culture. Everybody in Georgia, whether you want to know it or not, owns guns. We have gun households. Whether you're white, whether you're black, it's just something you have. And I think it's important to understand that it's not about comfort, it's not about anything, it's just about equity, right? Because if these gun nuts from Locust Grove decide they're gonna feel away and drive their happy asses up to within my perimeter, I should be able to defend myself against those people, no? And I think when we start having conversations about gun rights and gun reform, progressives tend to leap to this extreme set of ways to police people with guns. And the problem I have with that entire conversation is that, one, the systems in place to enforce anything related to guns are already overrun by white supremacists. So whether you're talking about the police, the FBI, the ATF, ICE, whoever you're going to empower to enforce any new restrictions on guns, whether you're talking about insuring guns, whether you're talking about gun registration, whether you're talking about training or written exams for guns, all the stuff that people keep talking about as solutions ultimately means you're going to empower these already proven white supremacist units of law enforcement to, are they gonna equally apply these laws to white communities as they are to black communities? History would answer you no. History would actually answer you hell no. So no, I'm not actually interested in a policy that would suggest that now because I own a gun, I have to pay a monthly insurance fee for liability in case that gun fires on someone. No, I'm not interested in having a conversation about being required by law to lock my guns up separately from my ammunition. No, I'm actually not interested in having a conversation about having to go in for an eye exam every 6 months to determine whether I can see in front of me. I'm not interested in having to go. Now, I went through the registration process and the licensing process. You got to go to the fingerprints. You got to do extensive background checks. All that stuff is legit. I'm not interested in doing that every 6 months. If my license lasts 10 years, it should last 10 years. If it lasts 7 years, it should last 7 years. So all of this added policing is really, all it's going to do is make it harder for people like me to protect myself from people like those gun nuts in Locust Grove, from the random shooters in the movie theater. And I'm not willing to engage in a conversation with anyone who's going to ignore the fact that throughout our entire nation's history, guns have been used to preserve all rights for white people. That's what they've been used for. And until white people are willing to accept that as a part of the fabric of our society, I'm not having any conversations about it. It's a non-starter, because all of the solutions that seem to be coming from progressives in the Twitter sphere are really about adding adding punitive damages to users or owners of guns. Not even users, but just owners. So if you inherit a gun, or if a gun is given to you as a gift, if you have a certain amount of value in your ownership in a gun, I just think once you start putting a monthly cost on something that you own, it's automatically a racist policy. It's automatically going to force more black people who are statistically have less wealth, have less property, have less income. Now you're forcing more expenses on us. Because why? Because this white shooter in Florida is mentally ill, as you say, or because this shooter in Vegas is deranged. I just feel like it's not really fair when your response to white male dominance going awry, when you realize that the mentality that's been embedded to protect you all from us is now backfiring, literally, that your immediate result is to create a system where you're further allowing police to kick down my door and come check on me and lock my black ass up because I didn't go get an eye exam on January 1st and June 1st, or because my license hasn't been updated frequently enough for you, or because now if you have a policy where your guns are required to be locked up separately from your ammo, or that you have to register every gun, now you're really enabling more probable cause for really unwarranted search warrants in cars and in homes. And it's going to fall down on black people. As soon as I started resisting this argument that people were bringing up, everybody said, well, it should be as much as to get a car. The policy around getting a gun or having a gun should be the same as having a car, which means you have to insure your car. Well, actually, to own a car, you don't have to insure your car. To own a car, you really don't have to register your car. You have to register your car to drive your car in the street, not park it in your garage. You have to register your car. You have to insure your car, not to own it and park it in a garage, but to drive it on the street. So those are really two different things. And really, if we want to talk about insurance and cars, that's another system where we've seen over and over again, black people are overcharged for the same services. My insurance in Castleberry Hill, this black neighborhood that I live in, costs me more than your suburban insurance rates. It costs me more than if I lived in a white community. That's just a fact. Our insurance rates are higher. So giving that freedom and access to an insurance company, again, is just adding another restrictive force, disabling black people to arm themselves and protect ourselves from a very necessary threat. So I'm not interested in that conversation. Drop down in the comments. Let me know what you think. I fully expect to get an onslaught of ignorant responses from this, but that's what I'm telling you. And what I really want y'all to hear me on this is, it's not about the guns. It's not about the mass shootings. We have a series of catastrophic issues plaguing our country right now. And if progressives make this a hot ticket issue going into our blue wave November, and use this with white progressives, the blind spot progressives, use this as a hot ticket issue moving in through the South, where you're relying, and not even just the South, but red states where black people live and are surrounded by this imminent danger all the time. If you use this to force progressive candidates, whether they're Democrats, whether they're independents, whether they're socialists, whoever, to force these hardline issues on the ballots in November, we're going to lose. Because I'll tell you, black people have a certain tolerance for white nonsense, and we bent to an extreme in 2016. I think the last formation of that you're going to see where black people are in tow and line for the Democratic Party is really 2008. I think that was the end of it. I think now black people are a lot more skeptical. And I want to talk about one specific example. I mentioned online that I believe the conversation around gun reform starts with an assault rifles ban. I don't think that, and there's no argument that a handgun or a pistol is the same thing as this semi-automatic or automatic rifle that is causing all of these particular instances. That's the common thread. You've seen the numbers of killings and mass shootings increase since George W. Bush let the assault rifles ban expire that was in the 94 crime bill. And this is where we have to get hairy about this, because I think with black people, we kind of went along with that one time in 94. The Congressional Black Caucus went along with the crime bill and the increased sentencing and the death penalty and all this other stuff and the mandatory minimums. It happened, but it's kind of like fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. And no, wait. The point is you can't fool me twice. And all I'm saying is the crime bill passed, then that something like that shouldn't be able to pass again, because we know the lessons from it are that it was disproportionately enforced to where it led to mass incarceration of black people. That's all it was used for. You had all this Violence Against Women's Act. Women were still being assaulted, raped, killed by their spouses. The threats were in the house. That's what it's always been. So now we're talking about, an assault rifle ban. How do we even get that back on the table? That's a whole conversation. That's a starter conversation, because we don't even have the kinks on that worked out. And all the compromises that were made by both sides to get to an omnibus crime bill that included an assault rifles ban that only lasted 10 years and George W. Bush let it expire, I think we have to be really stupid to walk back down the same path, especially as black voters, and think that we're going to have this conversation about assault rifles ban and then talk about gun insurance when we can't even get people to agree on, you can't even get ultra progressives like Bernie Sanders to agree on holding gun manufacturers and sellers liable for selling to people who shouldn't get the guns. You talk about you can't perform a background check within 3 days, and therefore there's no policy now. If there's any glitch in your system and you can't perform this background check through whatever fault of your own, now you're able to sell this gun to this nut just because they're buying a certain amount of guns. I think there's a lot of ways that we can enforce this, but I think having a financial cap or punishment on owning of a gun, I think is ridiculous. I think if you want to talk about a buyback program, I think a buyback program has to be about ammunition, not about weapons themselves, because there's a value to a gun itself that isn't the same as the ammunition. I think maybe that's how we resolve this. Maybe ammunition sales are illegal now completely, and you can only get ammunition through a subscriber. Maybe you have to go through a background check to have a subscriber, and maybe your subscriber, the subscription service of ammunition is now the enforcer of these insurances and these other restrictions. Because now, if I can't buy the ammunition, or if I have to buy a certain amount, a subscriber can limit how much you can purchase or how much you can sell. A subscriber can immediately monitor or trace, okay, if this person bought this much ammunition at this location, this is something the authorities need to be aware of. Keep your eye on this person. Whatever the situation is, I think that might be a model to use. I think we have to start to be smarter. We have to use technology. We cannot just rely on fees. We can't rely on these old models of using laws to keep people law-abiding, because the enforcers of the law enforcement officers are they work within inherently racist systems that ultimately come down on black people worse. So I'm not interested in that conversation until we have a serious acknowledgement of that as a problem. I want to just point out also that I don't want to sound insensitive, but I've seen, there's pictures online of the parents mourning the losses of their children, and they're literally showing up to the school wearing Trump 2020 shirts. Like, not even Trump 2016, Trump 2020. So I'm kind of like, what lessons are you learning? Like, what have you really began to understand? Within 24 hours of the shooting, this man did not make a comment at all. This man took $36 million from the NRA to run for president. And now the media is falling right back into the same pattern of doing this whataboutism. I've seen so many articles talking about how Barack Obama ran out of words on guns. Up until the year he left office, he was in a lame duck position, thoroughly seated lame duck. And this person was still holding town halls, giving incredibly articulate arguments about the need to police guns. He gave very good examples about how automotive related deaths dropped significantly once we started focusing on the core issues around those accidents. And I think it is important to think about the broader scale, but the reality is, if we're talking about votes and rights and what Democrats need, we need to get these people out of office. So you're not going to get there by alienating people who live in fear, like myself. I'm not afraid of y'all white people. I'm really not. But at the end of the day, I feel like I don't need another law giving the police more authority to break down my door and take something out of my apartment. I don't need that. And that's all of this. That's what any conversation that starts with that, y'all can have it amongst yourselves, because I won't be there and I won't be voting for it. And I imagine many other black people, that would be a deciding factor as to why we're going to just completely opt out, because we're not going back to this crime bill situation again. Fool me once. I want to talk about, in the wake of the shooting, it didn't even take 10 minutes. And again, we've seen this automated influx of bot activity. There are companies that monitor all of this. They have lists of entire automated accounts that only exist to promote Russian propaganda. At the drop of a dime, they use trending topics to infiltrate a message, to take over a conversation. Sometimes they start a trending topic to infiltrate a message and spread propaganda. This is something that Twitter has been unwilling to address. There's so much technology that lets you know which accounts are funded by who and operated by who, and there is no interest in resolving this. There is no commitment to stopping this. And that's something where we really, really, really have to draw the line. It can't continue. And I want to discuss an alternative. I've mentioned before on the show about the Exodus platforms. They can be found at amplify.me. As of right now, the launch for Exodus is underway. The initial invites have all been sent out, so the core base of users, I think, is pretty much solidified. It's still invite only at this moment. The apps themselves are launching within the next 24 hours, and so you can look forward to that. Again, if you haven't, I would say go ahead and follow Adrian C. Jackson on Twitter. There's been a lot of attempts to shut his account down. Many of our accounts who were proponents of this initial movement. And I think that it's going to be a struggle to get this off the ground, regardless of how well executed it is, how well we promote it, how well we brand it, how well we work to spread it. It's going to be a challenge. But it's so necessary to have a competitive set of platforms that isn't overrun by Nazis and botsies. That our only option is to really try this and make it work. I think our society is in many ways going to depend on this set of platforms and others like it. So again, I've talked about it before on the show. Exodus is the hashtag associated with it. It is very much in keeping with the theme of this weekend and the month. And so definitely look for more information on that at amplified.me. Or www.amplified.me, and also following Adrian Jackson at Adrian C. Jax on Twitter. With that, I'd like to invite you all to go see the movie Black Panther. It was phenomenal. I will probably go see it multiple more times this weekend. Well, maybe not multiple times this weekend, but I'm probably going to see it a couple more times before it leaves the theater. Then I'll probably buy it on DVD. My hope would be that this is one of the biggest box offices in history. Certainly all of the the tools needed to get to that point are there. So I want to definitely encourage you to go see that movie. I encourage you to look up the history of the Black Panthers. Forget what you thought you knew about it. I encourage you to look up Angela Davis specifically. The case against Angela Davis is a very telling one with regard to this discussion about how black people are treated with guns and how white people are treated with guns. Black people with guns get added to the FBI's most wanted list without even firing a gun. White people don't get that same treatment. So again, looking back, this is the Sankofa moment for us. Don't fall into the same trap. So that's your assignment for the week. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope you all go see the movie. I hope you take someone else to go see the movie. If you can't make it to the movie, buy a ticket anyway, just so it can contribute to their box office bottom line. And hell, you might know a friend who wants to go see this movie who can't afford a ticket. So buy a ticket for a friend. Offer to buy a ticket for a stranger. Just be open to it. And then wear your print if you got some, because that was another fantastic part of going to see this movie. Everybody dressed up in their prints and their costumes and their wardrobe and everything like that. So with that, I'd like to thank our friends to the show. If you'd like to become a friend of the show, please contribute $1 or more to the PayPal link above, www.paypal.me/JKH2. Today I'm thanking Sarah S., Elizabeth C., Michael P., Geraldine T., and also Barry G. So thank you all for continuing to support. Thank you all for watching. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Always retweet and repeat. And as always, I'd like to ask you to relax, relate, and resist. Thank you.
Too complex, much too complex, too complex, much too complex, too complex, too complex, too complex.